The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host Mark Snyder. We got an interesting show for you today. As you know, I spend most of all my programs of the first hour, I talk about the writings of Edward Albert Meyer. And if you don't know who Billy Edward Albert Meyer is, he's an 81-year-old man who lives in Switzerland, near a little town behind a little village, a mountain village called Schmidreuti. A lot of people refer to his home as Hinter Schmidreuti. It's about 35 minutes east of Zurich, nestled among the green pine forest and the snow-capped mountains of Switzerland. Billy is just an individual that is really hard to put into words. If you've ever seriously read his material, you will shortly realize that you're dealing with the greatest source of wisdom on the planet, at least wisdom of a spiritual nature anyway. I would have to say that Billy grew up in northern Switzerland in an area called Bulak, Switzerland, and when he was about 4 years old, he started getting telepathic messages from a man named Svath. Svath was an extraterrestrial human from a star system called the Pleiades star system. And he was on the Earth intentionally to mentor this young boy from Switzerland because his people have the technology to recognize what's called spirit forms. And we all have a spirit form. It's a fragment of the universal consciousness. It's the part of us that never dies. And Billy was here to live another lifetime, to teach the people of Earth about the creational laws, the universal laws, as he had done in previous lifetimes. And Svath told Billy that he had been the people that we call Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad in his earlier lives, and he taught something called the teaching of the Spirit. And one of the books in the teaching of the Spirit is called The Might of Thoughts. It's a book that has a lot of information, and I'll say that much to you. And I've got two guys on the show today that are going to help me out as we discuss one particular page in this book, page 304 in The Might of Thoughts. And the first fellow is Stephen Woods, who acts as kind of my, I don't know what you would call him, the manager, the producer for the radio show. He kind of stays in the background most of the time. And Solon, who has been coming on the show on a somewhat regular basis. So Stephen, first, how are you today? Are you guys able to hear me?
I am.
Solon, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yep. Stephen,
Awesome.
Are you there? Well, at least we got Solon. I'm not sure if Stephen is muted or your microphone might be muted. But in any case, Solon, did you have a chance to look at that page 304? I know you had some other stuff you wanted to talk about as well.
Yes, I looked over it, and I actually have a lot of things to talk about with that, especially the first part.
Well, this is one of those pages that I could literally spend weeks on. And it's just something, I've read it before many times, but it never clicked until today. It's really starting to click. And where I'm going to start in this, and then you can take it wherever you feel that you want to go. And plus, I know you have some other material you want to cover. I'm going to read this one passage and I'd like to compare notes with you and see, what it meant to you. And it says here, whoever goes through life with inner prosperity and inner abundance has much joy and is not disturbed when everything gets extremely hard from time to time, because knowledge teaches us that it is very good and very necessary. Connected with this is also the conviction that with the right activation and direction of one's prosperity and abundance, a correct provision is always guaranteed. To this end, however, the human being must never think in a needy manner, because thoughts live as do words, for which reason nobody should call him or herself needy. And I think about churches, so many churches where you see people pleading with God that, they need more money, they need this person to come back into their life, they need a job, or whatever their needs are. And I'm thinking to myself, actually, what they're doing is making it more likely that they're going to continue to need more and more things, because we should never be needy in our thoughts. Do you have a comment on that, Solon?
Actually, yeah, I do. It reminds me of something Billy wrote. I can't remember exactly where he talks about that a tree gives, it was in The Way to Live, that a tree gives fruit and shade and oxygen and helps out, the environment around it without ever asking for anything.
In return.
Yes, yeah, like being needy. It's not, you don't see that in with something that gives you fruit.
Trees are one of my favorite things in the world. I think we need a lot more trees. And it's so unfortunate that these California fires have destroyed so many trees. What do you think?
Yeah, it's really sad. It's even worse than what's going on in Brazil, with them cutting back or burning down the rainforest there.
And what's interesting is this goes back to what I've been saying about population and the comparisons that I've done with cattle. And like if we took all 7 billion people and fit them into Texas, and you allow those people to eat meat, and if you have just one cow per person, that's 7 billion cows. Each cow should have about 2 acres. So that's 14 billion acres, which is 21 million square miles. So people that think that, we can just fit all the people in Texas, they're not thinking about the impact of 7 billion people. And that's why they're cleaning that rainforest down there, is to make room for cattle so more people can eat beef. It's obscene, isn't it?
Crazy, yeah.
It's
like the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
Stephen, is your mic working?
I believe so. Can you hear me?
Excellent. I'm glad you can join us.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks, Mark.
And did you two have a chance to say hello? Or have you met before?
I have not.
Oh, okay.
I've never met Stephen.
Okay. It's really interesting because Solon, I guess you just started listening to me, and then it was the same kind of thing with Stephen. And Solon, had you ever heard any of the Meyer writings before my show, or when did you discover the Meyer stuff?
I discovered it in probably around like 2012, but I didn't really get into it till about 2015.
Oh wow, 2015?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
That late? Wow.
Well, it's almost 2019. So.
You've come a long way in a very short time.
Yeah, I pretty much got consumed by it.
That's so funny. I was talking to my nephew. It's been a year or two ago. And he had a friend that discovered the Meyer material. And this kid did not come out of his bedroom for 3 days. He just was on the web all over. And then I don't know if he still studies the Meyer material or what, but for that 3 days, he was just locked in. I mean, he couldn't move.
Wow.
I thought that was really interesting. Stephen, when did you start with the Meyer material?
I think it's been a couple years.
A couple years now?
Yeah.
Did you hear it first on my show or from somewhere else?
It was from somewhere else. Yeah. I don't even remember all the specifics, but yeah, I was locked into my room listening to your show for a long time.
Really?
Yeah.
There was a guy that used to cover the Meyer material, Randy Winters, and I've listened to a bunch of his stuff. Now, I don't know what happened with him, but him and the Meyer people had a huge falling out, and he doesn't cover it at all anymore. I think he writes like horror books and stuff. I don't know what. It's just weird. But that's how I came, if you're wondering how I came across it. It was
that's actually how I found out as well.
Randy Winters?
Mr. Randy, yeah.
He was a gifted guy. I wish he would have stayed on the track, you know.
Yeah, he's a good presenter. Yeah.
Very good. But to get back here on the Might of Thoughts, it's saying the human being must never think in a needy manner because thoughts live as do words. And when you're projecting these thoughts of I need, you're creating that situation. So begging and pleading and having this mentality of needing is the exact opposite of what you should be doing, because your thoughts have a tremendous might. So it's like I say this a million times, and one of the things I want to talk about tonight is repetition. I'm glad I brought that up again, is the incredible importance of repetition. And tell yourself, in the present tense, it has to be in the present tense, tell yourself, I am confident. I am relaxed. I'm cheerful. I'm enthusiastic. I'm the master of my own destiny. I am the forger of my own fortune. I am the creator of my own good luck. I do not allow my thoughts to drift. I steer my thoughts like a captain steers his ship. So what you're doing is affirming your strength, affirming your ability, not this. Don't you guys get that? I mean, it's like much of religion is pleading all the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sense this. It's this striving and this constant work towards perfecting yourself, and like you've talked about, the ideals versus ideas. You know, and it's so it takes a lot of effort to control your thoughts and the things that you want to set your mind on. I know for me, my default goes back to chaos. You know,
That's
so true, isn't it? It's just so true.
It's all over the place. So easy to see and hear about. I mean, you don't have to go very far to witness it nowadays. I mean, you cut on the TV, they're talking about war, you know, and just advertise the chaos, it seems, you know. I actually want to add that I recently started asking people if they thought that we'd ever live in a world that would have no wars, and people can't really seem to imagine that. They seem to think it's always going to happen, and so it's like we almost have this inside of us that it's supposed to be chaotic.
Well, you know about our genetic predisposition for war. You know that whole story, I'm sure.
Of course, yes.
That's a very interesting story, and I won't go over it, but just to cover it in a very, very short way. The story of the history of humanity is extremely long, and we could spend all 2 hours on this topic. There were the people from Lyra Vega came first in the Milky Way galaxy, and they traveled to other worlds. They conquered other worlds. They were very warlike. They enslaved people sometimes. They had these tremendous weapons that could destroy entire worlds. And they knew this was their big problem. They were by their nature too aggressive. So there was a group that split off from the first group that came into Lyra Vega. And they went to the Cirrus system. And they were very, very big genetic engineers, which is something that's going on right now. We're finally starting to do genetic engineering. And so they engineered out of themselves the urge to fight, because they didn't want to be like their forefathers who conquered all these people and destroyed other worlds. Well, they found that they went too far in the wrong direction. So they couldn't even defend themselves anymore. So they had to spin off another race of humanity that had a shortened lifespan and a predisposition to fighting. And these people, which were called the genetically manipulated people, were very, very good fighters and very extremely aggressive. And they started to scare, literally, these people from the Cirrus system. And there was the majority of the people in the Cirrus system said, we have to just do away with these people because they're just too dangerous. These genetically manipulated people, they only have a lifespan of 100 years. And they are very, very good fighters, and they like to fight. And so they just decided to terminate them. Well, there was a group of these supposed, they're called the creator overlords in the Cirrus system. And there was a group that split off, and they took these genetically manipulated people and left the Cirrus system. They took a group of them. The rest of them probably were killed off by the quote-unquote creator overlords. And they came to our solar system. They came first to Mars, and then to Melona, and then to Earth. So our solar system had another planet in it called Melona that was, I think, a larger planet that was in the inhabitable area, as well as Mars, Mars, had huge rivers on it at that time. It was a good place to live. The people there built giant pyramids and all sorts of things. Now, the people on Melona were they still had their aggressive tendencies. So they ended up actually destroying their whole planet. There was some great war. They redirected an ocean into a volcano, which literally split the planet in half. And almost no one on Melona got off. And this was the great event that pushed Mars out of its old orbit into the orbit it has now and slammed into Mars. All this debris, which just about destroyed Mars. It upset their atmosphere. It caused Mars to become kind of a wasteland. So the people on Mars had to leave, and they left, and they had to come to Earth. Now, this is talked about in Contact 251. Now, if you do any study, Mars has about 1/3 of the gravity of Earth. So they had to do some adjustments to their skeletal system before they came to Earth. I don't know what they did. It doesn't go into it in any detail. But when they got here to Earth, finally, they intermingled, they commingled with the people of the Earth. Now, I don't want to sound racist. We live in such a politically correct environment, but my understanding is, and now this isn't hardcore, the naturally evolving Earth human, I think generally was a person of color. So we have a very strange hodgepodge of people that have come to the Earth. We had people that came here from the other side of the galaxy. The Asian people came here about 20,000 years ago. They got stranded. They had problems with their ship. That's a whole long story, which I haven't studied enough. The people from the Cirrus system came here. They settled on Mars and Melona, and eventually came to Earth. We had people millions of years ago that came from Lyra Vega, settled on the Earth. We had these two gigantic civilizations, one 150,000 years ago, which was headed up by Pelagon, who was a person from the Pleiadian star system. And then 133,000 years ago, we also had Atlantis and Lemuria. So, gosh, I went off on a huge tirade there that I did not plan on. But I think someone has a question, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious, Mark, about the genes being affected where we live to 100 years. Mm-hmm. Was that where was that stemming from? Because I'm wondering why the whole Earth has that right now and not just an isolated portion of it.
Well, I think from what I understand, Solon can correct me if he knows better, but those genes were passed all over the Earth, right, Solon? I mean, the aggression genes, the short lifespan, etc.
Well, I read this in the Ohm of how it actually came to be. Well, I would say, I shouldn't say it like that, but I don't, there has been books out that have shown that people live past 100, but I don't know how, but I know at one point when the Pleiadians came here, they came here with a race of people. I don't know if it's Pleiadians or not. They were called the Celestial Brothers and Sisters. Came here without these genes, and it was part of the mission to get everyone out of these genes, but they wanted it to be done naturally without mixing of these races. And eventually these people mixed with these other people, and I think that's where we have a lot of these stories that you hear about in the Bible with these very tall people, as well as fairies and small people, as well as some of the ages of some of those people were back in the day.
Well, even now the Pleiadians live to be 1,000 years old. I think that's the normal lifespan for a human being, right?
Well, we could live older, but it was said that if we live longer than that, you actually go into a stagnation where there's less striving that takes place with the spirit, because it does need to go into its resting period to gather up all this stuff.
That's really interesting.
But just think how disabled we are right now with such a limited lifespan. I mean, it'd be like if you live to 1,000, you're only living to 10 years old, 10% of that.
So, yeah.
Look at how disabling that is for us to learn. I mean, it takes so long just to get to a point where you're mature enough to understand things, and then you're gone.
Yeah. It takes about 50 years almost to be up to speed. Right. I see these people and their politicians. The head of the UN is 46 years old. And I'm like,
what?
Seriously?
I did not know that.
I think it's the head of UN. And I think the CEO of Google now is like 46 or something like that too. It's like, that's about the time when you just barely start to figure things out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right. As I'm getting older, I'm starting to realize that I'm like, man, I've changed a lot. So I can only imagine when you get older to a certain point. It is stated the certain age groups in the way to live. But I can't recall any of that. But there's definitely something that takes place with each.
Billy talked about each stage of the life and how we think and what our perspective is in each one of those stages, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to try to find that later, maybe.
What about this for an archetype, you guys? Even in religions across the board, bringing order to chaos. You see that in the stories that they give, and as a reason for life. I know we're here to evolve our consciousness, but a big portion of that is bringing order to chaos.
Wow. That's the whole reason of the material life in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
To try to stay within the law of harmony, to try to stay in a neutral positive balance,
mm-hmm.
where we're neutral positive, we're not too positive, we're reasonable, but we're not negative. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I want to get back to page 304, I went to Mars, and I went to Malona, and I went to the Sirius star system, and came back to planet Earth here. One of the things we're shooting for is what's called long-term potentiation. And this is a process of strengthening the synapses in the brain. So with long-term potentiation, we have a persistent strengthening of the synapses. That's why I repeat so much. My show is half repetition. So these are patterns of synaptic activity. They produce a long-lasting increase in the signal transmission between the neurons. And sometimes you'll hear the acronym LTP. It's the abbreviation for long-term potentiation. So this is how we learn. And frequent repetition produces what's called a natural tendency. And let me read a little bit about what the Meyer stuff says about repetition. Figure Bulletin 35. The human learns through constant repetition. Respectively, constant drops make a hole in the stone because the entire thing hammers itself in through endless repetition, whereby the human, exactly as with learning, through constant repetition, imprints everything into himself. And what I notice is when you think you know something is when you're just now starting to get your mind around it. So, contact 243. Only through constant repetition of a thing or knowledge, etc., the human being is able to comprehend and retain in his or her memory what is learned, whereby he or she then begins to act according to it. So when something's repeated enough, it creates these synapses in the brain. And one of the things that we have to do while you're learning is to create this little electrical signal which jumps across a gap between the synapses. And the gap between the two brain cells is real tiny. However, the first time the signal crosses from one brain cell to the other requires the most effort. Each time that signal jumps across that synapse, you get better and better and stronger and more clarity and more understanding. And that's the one thing that I've noticed. I want you, maybe Stephen, can you comment on long-term potentiation and repetition?
Oh, a question I have for you is that similar to programming your subconscious?
Absolutely.
All right.
The subconscious is a powerful tool, but it has been programmed with so much negativity, and it rotates negativity. You probably have a program. I have my inferiority program. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
I have in my subconscious a Mark is inferior program. Mark is not smart enough. Mark is not good looking enough. Mark is not strong enough. Mark is not, period. He's just not. So we all have this, and you have it. It's the wrong programming from your childhood. So the first thing I always say in those affirmations is, I am confident. And one of the things I noticed, Stephen, is when people when they have their greatest reaction, if you do introspection and figure out why you lost your temper or whatever, you will find usually there was something you were trying to defend about yourself.
Certainly, yep.
Have you ever noticed that?
Oh, yeah.
So the first thing you need to, if you're confident, you will not be threatened. You will not be angry. You will more likely stay in control. I'm confident. I'm optimistic is the next thing. I'm relaxed. I'm cheerful. And if something, if you allow yourself to lose your confidence, you also eventually lose your motivation and your enthusiasm. And one way to note it, if you're neutral positive, you will be enthusiastic. Solon, can you comment on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely verify this is true in terms of, I did a lot more thinking when you started asking me about, confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And you're definitely right that when you do lose it, you also do lose your motivation and whatever you were doing. So it is very important that you stay optimistic and as well as have the courage to continue.
So we never want to think in a needy way. Our thoughts live as do our words. And say things out loud. You will learn better that way. Say them out loud. What does it say here? Therefore, since time immemorial has been said, tend a thought. To tend a thought means to strengthen it. Or utter it, say it out loud, and it happens. Just as it is with the thought, the word is might and command. I'm getting a little noise. Is that Solon? Is that you?
Yeah, I apologize.
What was that? Was that a dog barking or what was
Oh,
that?
no, that's my chair. I'm trying not to move.
So say things out loud. I started doing this about probably a year ago, and I didn't know why I was doing it. I just started saying these things, from the might of thoughts out loud, because I wake up sometimes grumpy, and I wake up unmotivated, and I wake up with this weird pessimistic attitude, which is not like me. And I have to literally reprogram myself sometimes every morning. And sometimes I say these things 100 times. It's an amazing thing. Let me read what it says in the psyche about repetition. Repetition also belonged to the study, meaning that which has been once learned and read should be repeated often. This is because only through that can a permanent realization of the learned knowledge be ensured. And that's what we're trying to get. Permanent knowledge, something that's ingrained into your subconscious. Here it is also advantageous when the repetition is conducted aloud or softly, because through that each becomes conscious of the knowledge in its whole and full completeness, as thought as well as consciousness-based knowledge. Moreover, the form of self-recitation represents an expedient and effective exercise in the articulateness, which brings very great advantages in many life situations. Well, no wonder I started doing this, man.
Mm-hmm.
Comments?
After watching some of Billy's interviews, he always seems so calm. Even if they have a question that's hard, or an example in his life might seem to be going counter to what the point was, right? So they're trying to grill him on a point that maybe they feel he's a hypocrite on, and he just is calm as a cucumber and handles it with that confidence. He doesn't get rattled. He just answers it in a confident form where it just maintains his bearing. He doesn't have to get upset and just boop.
What is so interesting, because I just gave that galactic history little thing, but that is not my focus, not anymore. And I think about these people that are always clamoring for disclosure, and it's a complete disorientation to what this is all about, because what is important is the knowledge these people bring. And we already have a guy that's been having contact for over 75 years. Why not pick his material up and listen to what this guy's saying? What do you think, Solon?
Man, he's also teaching them. So it's not like he's also getting information from them, but it's working both ways. They're also evolving, being around Billy.
Isn't that something?
It's amazing. We really should give this guy a chance. If nothing else, you don't have to agree with it. It's good to be a skeptic.
We're about 35 minutes into this thing, and I want to bring us back to Mighty Thoughts, but I wanted to make sure, Solon, you had a chance to talk about some of the stuff you were going to bring to the show, if you want.
Yeah, it'd be great.
So fire away, man.
Oh, well, I was hoping you were going to read this section on 304. But
go ahead.
But in the beginning, I just know in the beginning of it, it talks about suggesting ideas to him or herself, and they're saying that this is nothing other than self-hypnosis, which comes about by means of power of one's thoughts, and whereby indeed by means of minded thought, whereby as a rule a belief is behind it, from which the significant thoughts are created. And there is actual. Do you not have the Talmud of Emmanuel? Do you?
I do. Thank goodness, because of Stephen, he got it for me, and now it's right here on my desk.
Oh, okay, awesome. Well, in there it actually gives examples of some of these things.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if you've gotten to the part where it talks about him doing some of these healing.
What page?
I believe it starts. You have the English version, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, the English version. I just had it right here. Yes, it starts. It's chapter 9. It's 166, page 166.
All right.
And it talks about how he was healing grief with like a bunch of people, and then it gives a explanation. And within that, it talks about these people having these self-healing abilities within themselves, which all Billy's doing is getting these people to say this to themselves in a way where they are believing it, which I like the word being confident that it's true. Using your words, so to say, because beliefs are like, yes, they have some type of power to them, but it's, I really like how Billy's trying to explain it in terms of being confident, and saying that, I can do this. And then when you say it, you can almost feel it more so than you believing you can do it. It's like you put it into motion. You know what I mean?
This is very interesting because in this story, it seems like we're dealing with a person who may have two problems, one of which is some disease, but even more important than that is that they're in grief, aren't they? They're very depressed.
Yeah, it's a pretty big story. It also talks about Rasputin doing the same exact thing to the Tsar's son, I think it was. That's also talked about there in the explanation on I believe it's it's on page. Where is it at? Actually, I thought that was right there. I had it on the page and I moved it. Oh, there it is. It's on 174.
Can I read this explanation real quick?
Please.
Okay. This relates so much to what we're talking about here in terms of being confident and optimistic and the power of repetition and things like that. It says here, the grief-stricken paralytic's trust in Emmanuel, as well as his certainty that he would be healed by Emmanuel's power, activated his life powers. Consequently, he was healed of his grief from that hour on. Thus, in this case, as well as in various other cases, it was the suggestive words and consciousness powers of Emmanuel by which the paralytic, befallen by grief, was healed. His trust, his certainty, and hope that he would be healed of his suffering allowed him to think about his rationality. Now, one of the things that this is very important that I would interpret this way, and you guys keep me honest here in case I'm going off track, but this guy who was grief-stricken, he could heal himself if he could focus his thoughts properly. He could have healed himself. Now, the Christian point of view is that it would have been the power of Jesus that healed this man. And what the might of thoughts is teaching, and what Emmanuel really taught, it is the power of your own thinking that can heal you. What is the nature of the thoughts that by their might alone, every conceivable thing can come to fruition? So this man could have healed himself. But anyway, let me continue here. It says, go ahead.
Quick question, though. Could his thoughts have made him sick as well?
It's probably why he's sick.
Right.
Exactly.
Probably why he's sick.
Dr. Sarno writes of that, healing back pain. And that's exactly it. That your body produces lack of oxygen in certain areas of your body, which produces soreness.
Wow. I had back surgery when I was 15 years old or something like that. So at a very, very young age, I was plagued with this back injury and this back pain. And, it really is the truth that your consciousness has a huge effect. Your thinking, your ability to think a thought that's focused, that has absolute certainty in it. And with those kind of thoughts, you can do whatever. You can do just about anything. Solon, did you have a comment?
Yeah, well, I do want to say that later it is clarified that whenever Billy used the word spirit, he was talking about the conscience, but it didn't have a word for it they didn't have that at that point in time.
And we have a material consciousness as well as a spiritual consciousness, right?
Correct, yes. The spirit world and the material world both have overlaying, like it also has a psyche, but it's called the gamut. So they both have their counterparts. I'm trying to say counterparts.
So we have a fragment within us of the universal consciousness, and that is called the Geist form in the German. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Hey guys, is that Geist form a part of all the plants and other things in the universe as well?
Well, every plant, every animal has their own Geist form, is my understanding.
But is it from the same piece of creation, though?
No, I think that's all. The way I've always interpreted it is we each have our own part piece of creation within us. Is that correct according to your understanding, Solon?
Yes, yeah. I think plants evolve through a impulse base, and animals evolve through an instinct base, and we evolve through a intellect base, or you could say more of a being aware or using the consciousness itself. Consciousness is what they call it.
But do we share that same spark of life, I guess? Is that, I that's where I'm a little confused as far as what is the part piece of creation. Is it the same? I know that we all have different evolutionary progresses, whether it be conscious evolution or impulse-based evolution, but that life force behind it, is that what they're talking about?
I think we each have a unique part or fragment of this gigantic universal consciousness.
But that's what they used to say, that we're all one, connected, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I think is really the whole. I mean, if we could ever learn that, I really get a better understanding on that. That would help so much.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole concept, in terms of our thoughts and repetition, one of the things that I started repeating way before I ever started studying the mind of thoughts is the information that deals with creation and deals with love. And there are certain passages that are so profound, I think I maybe get a pre-conscious understanding before I really get a conscious understanding. And some of this stuff I don't have a completely conscious understanding of yet. For example, there's one verse that goes, love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. So I just feel I'm on the verge of trying to get a good handle on that, or that's starting to come together. The absolute logic is the portion that sticks in my brain. And when I look at creation, there is an absolute logic. Like if we were healthy in our thinking, we would be so appalled at the things that we see every day. And I'm becoming more and more appalled by this. And as I drive to work and I see the dead deer and the dead raccoons and the dead animals continually, and I see the chopped down trees and the building of the apartment buildings and our insanity just rushing forward unabated. And if we could just step back and see the absolute logic of creation and understand that love is the highest principle, we would know so much. I mean, how can you be a bulldozer operator and just run down these 7,500-year-old trees? How can you do that? You know, there's one section I drive past on the way to work, and it's next to a nursery, and I don't know what this business does, but they used to have these beautiful trees. It was just like maybe a half an acre, 3/4 of an acre, and there were these beautiful trees. Some of the pine trees were 75 years old, and oak trees, and I used to love driving past that. And then they cut all those trees down, and I can remember when they cut all those trees down, it was warm outside and nice outside, and something told me, wow, wait till the winter comes and wait till the rains start and everything. And it is this muddy mess, complete disgusting, and they can't even use that area of land. What were they thinking? You know, it's just, so, I mean, where is the logic is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, all of these things that we're learning, they have this wisdom that goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's one of the reasons we have to have this repetition, because then it goes and becomes just beginning knowledge, and then it goes into lived experience and self-tested experience, and you begin to retain it in your memory, and you begin to comprehend it. At least that's what I'm starting to see in this stuff. Stephen, do you have any comment on that? Is your microphone?
Sorry. I was unmuted. Yeah, sorry. Just taking it all in. Nope, don't have any questions at this point.
Solon.
Well, I would like to add that you can see this within a child whenever they're around, their family or peers and whatnot, that if they have yet to develop a language, they're constantly hearing whatever language or their environment language that's giving them, to a point where it is becoming repetition, and now they're able to eventually put it all together and eventually utilize it. So it's like, we already do this, we just not are aware of this, that this is a thing that puts these things together within us. Hopefully I said that correctly.
So you mentioned repetition there. So the child learns language through repetition, right?
Exactly. Yes. I mean, that's it. I mean, you go out there and you point, you say duck, and then eventually they say duck, and then they see the duck again and they say duck. And I've seen this, within my nieces, so their nephews.
And you know what's so interesting about all of that is their material consciousness is learning to talk again, but they have a Geist form, they have a spirit form, and programmed into their subconscious is the essences of the wisdom from all their previous lifetimes. So it's this, I find this to be kind of an irony that we have to learn again. The material consciousness has to start all over again, a new personality. But all of that wisdom And if you read in the psyche, I think it says that the normal spirit form on the earth of a human being is right around 4.5 million years old. Isn't that astonishing?
You know, I can't wrap my mind around that.
I know. It's astonishing. It makes me wonder, and just like Stephen was saying, you got to get to be 40 or 50 years old before you get back up to speed. And then there's, with our shortened lifespan, I don't know how long, I'll be lucid. Billy's very lucid into his older age. But yeah, there's a small window with our shortened lifespan. It's why it's so important to learn as much as you can, because we've got a small window. And then I wonder, in my next life, how long is it going to take before I find this material again?
Well, I imagine you'll hear it and you'll be attracted to it and you'll go through the whole motion again.
Isn't that something? You'll have to.
Well, I often wonder if, that's the reason why, a lot of these people are here today. I mean, like I told you in 2015, I heard about this and got interested into it. And it, next thing you know, I'm learning German and studying all this stuff. And it makes you wonder,
Oh, and that reminds me, and we've only got about 5 minutes left in this section of the show. And both of you guys, if you want to stay on, I think Frosty's going to be available for the second hour. He sent me an email. Hopefully he's on Skype. So we got to wrap this up a little bit here. I'm thinking. Anyway, we have a very small window in our current lifetime to get back up to speed. And I like what you were saying, Solon, that 2015, my God, that was like yesterday. I cannot believe how fast you've come along. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I don't even believe it, actually. After you say it, I'm like, that can't be right. Yeah. It's even hard to believe, actually.
It's not your first rodeo with this, then.
No, it's not your first rodeo.
I just surrounded myself with people who were learning the German and naturally taught it to me. Yeah, that just kind of happened.
Very interesting. And I wanted you to bring a little German. So could you? I know you're not prepared for this.
I'm definitely not.
Not at all, but I want you to bring a little German into the show, and maybe we could cover just each show a little bit of German. Not a lot because, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
Well, my biggest downfall, honestly, is speaking it. So I feel, I lack the confidence in that sense. Like I pick up a book, trying to figure out each word, and then I realize that, I'm saying a lot of these words wrong when I go to speak to a German and they correct me, and I feel grateful that I had that opportunity. But
well, that's going to be always the case, right?
Well, you would think that because in English we have so many silent letters and whatnot, but that's not the case in German. So
I emailed Marianne from Switzerland again just to touch base with her, and I don't know if she got back with me yet or not. I need to check and look close in my emails, but she is so good with English, but German is her first language. You know what I mean? And she has worked on so many of those translations, and I think it's been a little traumatic for her because it's very difficult, a very, very difficult, even impossible task in some ways, right?
Actually, I think some of it is impossible. Yeah, I think everyone definitely does a really good job trying to translate it, but at the end of the day, I still have to look at the German and see what they're saying in English, and I think that that's kind of strange. But I think that just shows how more superior the language is.
The other thing about Billy's writings is he has his own vocabulary too. At least I cannot find a lot of his words anywhere else.
Dude, you're not. You're not. But the concepts in German are there. Right? So if you know, and that's one of the reasons why whenever I try to teach somebody German, I try to teach them the prefixes, how the words are built, because I find that's the most important.
Like one of the prefixes is
Yeah, ear.
Is it ear? Is that the way you say it?
E-R, ear, yeah.
The one that means most ancient.
Yes, it's ear. Ear learning.
Ear, right?
Ear.
So that's a perfect example. Another German word that I came across in reading the Might Have Thought. Okay, we'll come back next hour, hopefully with Frosty Wooldridge. Thanks, guys. Hang on.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
She travels to Earth through the rainbow crystal bubbles from the furthest reaches of space and time, across the dimensions, through the elements, and in harmony with the colors of the universe. Through her mastery of abstract stream of consciousness malapropisms, she weaves a web of comic, satiric, cosmic conversation. Her subjects can range from Norman, the goose next door, to astrology and earth changes, and into the deep recesses of the soul matrix. She holds a wealth of knowledge on herbs, plants, and astrology. Join Mona and her guests on adventures of a feral hippie as she touches the earthly radio waves 5 days a week at 2 p.m. Monday to Friday on Studio B at Revolution Radio.
Frosty speaking. Frosty, are you going to do the second hour? Okay, so are you going to be on track? All right. I'll
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio.
Frosty speaking.
You don't need to expect us.
Please stand
We're
by.
already here.
Who are we? Where do we come from? Are you curious about the origins of the human race? Join me, Gavin McCall, and a variety of guests on Ancient Humans, where we decipher world events, explore scientific theories, personal stories, myths, mysteries, and lore about the history of the human race.
Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live.
Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. We are on the second hour of Ohio Exopolitics, and we're going to start talking about overpopulation and immigration. And we've got Frosty Wooldridge on the show for the second hour, and my producer, Stephen Woods, has also joined us. I don't know if you guys have met yet, but I'd like to introduce both of you. Frosty, this is Stephen, vice versa.
Stephen, it's a pleasure. I look forward to back and forth and addition to ideas concerning this subject. I'd really like to start off with what was on Facebook today, the Venezuela crisis in South America. And that crisis, of course, as you all know, is the collapse of Venezuela into a socialistic nightmare. And, of course, essentially voted in dictatorial powers that have really gone awry. And it's been all over Facebook. And if you watch some of my posts, the one thing that I said about what's happening in Venezuela is that, of course, they had 1 million people have literally migrated from Venezuela into Colombia in the last couple of years. Well, here's the crux of the problem. All of South America, according to the United Nations right now, is around 325 million people. But as the population projections are going to come to fruition within this century, South America is going to jump to well over 600 million, almost double. And so they're facing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and you all know that to be famine, pestilence, war, and disease. And so there's no saving all of those refugees. And the same thing coming up from Central America and even in Mexico, where they're out and overpopulating Honduras and El Salvador and Nicaragua and all that goes with that. And no matter how many people the United States absorbs or assimilates, which is well over 1.7 million every year, at some point, it's unsustainable, not only where they are living in Central America and Mexico and South America, but here in the United States. And so I hope that this conversation really starts to pour out into all of America. And I'm thankful for Mark Snyder for bringing it and pushing it and taking it forward. So I'm excited about this hour.
Thank you, Frosty. Now, what is the big problem in Venezuela? Is their civilization like on the verge of collapse or something?
Yes, it is. Venezuela right now is having incredible famine problems because they don't and haven't been able to grow enough food. They're watching their money collapse because of the socialistic practices. And for those of you who don't know what socialism means, it means giving to those who do not produce, who do not contribute, who do not partake in the civilization, and they ride the wagon. Well, less and less people pull the wagon, if you will, for the metaphor. And at some point, when there's only one horse pulling the wagon and there's 100,000 people riding the wagon, or 1 million or 10 million people riding the wagon, that horse breaks down. In other words, the system breaks down. And that's what's happened in Venezuela. And then you have chaos, and then you have mayhem, and then you have conflict, and then you have a revolution. And that's the sad situation there in Venezuela.
Did the Mayans also die off because of overpopulation and famine and things like that?
That's correct. The Mayans, for those of you who would like to look or read the book, which I have right here in my library, it's called Collapse by Jared Diamond. He also wrote Roses, Guns, and something or other with a Pulitzer Prize. But he talked about all of the civilizations who chose to succeed or fail, and the book is titled Collapse. And the Mayans, of course, chose to fail. Their slash and burn technique for feeding themselves was not organized enough to keep taking on massive population growth. And of course, they died from all of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
And what do you mean by choosing to fail? Could you elaborate on that?
Well, back then, they didn't understand what they were doing. And so they simply multiplied beyond the carrying capacity of the land. And so then the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse took over. And that's happened throughout, whether it's, the Canary Islands. You all know that story, just west of South America. 6 people in canoes came across the oceans. They populated the island, and then, of course, they grew to, I think, about 60,000 people. And they simply overran the carrying capacity. And at one point, they finally cut down the last tree. And then they no longer had any ability to feed themselves. And then they turned into little enclaves and groups, and then they warred against each other because they were warring for the last remaining food. And in the end, the Canary Islands failed, and all you see are those big monoliths of the 40-ton statues that look out to the ocean. Those statues are actually representatives of each family. And when people died, they felt that the spirits went into those statues so that they were all together. It's fascinating to see in this day and age. But again, the realities for those who suffered through it was not a nice deal. It certainly wasn't a nice deal for the Mayans. It's not a nice deal for what's happening in Africa right now. And of course, the ironic aspect of all of this, we all on Earth Day 1970, when I was a senior in college at Michigan State University, we said, well, my gosh, we've got 3.5 billion people on the planet. We need to start talking about population stabilization. We need to talk about sustainability. But instead, only the first world countries did that and went to a 2-child per woman family by choice. And that's why first world countries have been sustainable. But the rest of the third world countries and second world countries added 4.1 billion more people. We're now at 7.6 billion, headed for 10 billion. And nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to stand up and say, oh, my gosh, we're in trouble. And so we are simply screaming forward into the 21st century on this overpopulation juggernaut. And the UN said at some point within the next 10 to 20 years, there'll be 250 million refugees trying to find a new place to land. Well, guess where that place they want to land? Canada, the United States, certainly Europe, and of course, Australia. So that's the dilemma that we're facing, and it's not a very good dilemma, to tell you the truth.
So if the Mayans didn't understand that they couldn't exceed the carrying capacity of the planet, do we understand that?
At this point in time, no, we do not. As my book comes out in March, America's Accelerating Population Predicament, my book really is, and then Blindsiding Future Generations. And in the second chapter, I'm going to quote you Dr. Otis Graham, in his book Unguarded Gates, and I knew the man personally, he passed away last year. He taught at Stanford. He said, and I quote, "Most Western elites continue urging the wealthy West not to stem the migrant tide that adds 80 million new babies net gain annually to the planet, but to absorb our global brothers and sisters until their horrid ordeal has been endured and shared by all. 10 billion humans packed onto an ecologically devastated planet," unquote. That starts off my chapter 2 in my book that we'll publish in March. And so, no, the fact is that the American leadership of this country, and that goes all the way back to Reagan, it goes back to Bush's, it goes back to Clinton's, it goes all the way back even to Jimmy out of Georgia there. And so, and he still doesn't understand it. And he's around, he's about 90 something years old, the peanut farmer. And so we're now continually growing at 3.1 million per year. 2/3 of that is by immigration and their birth rates. And so we're in a lot of trouble as we stand right now at 330 million people headed for 440 million. So that's what's happening. And no, the leadership of America and all of the, I've written editorials on this for the New York Times, for the Boston Globe, for the Atlantic Monthly, for the San Francisco Examiner, for the Los Angeles Times, for the Denver Post, and for the Chicago Tribune, also the Minneapolis Star Tribune, Detroit Free Press, and guess what? The Atlanta Journal, which I actually used to throw papers for the Atlanta Journal when I lived in Georgia, and they simply won't they will not publish any of this. And as a matter of fact, they did publish a piece on the 27th of November by Thomas Friedman, who wrote a book called The World is Flat. And he talks about overpopulation, but he thinks we can get more energy, and he thinks we can solve it by having more energy. And of course, he's completely out of his mind. But he just wrote, and here's a man who's pretty smart. Unfortunately, he doesn't have any common sense. But he's still heralded, and he gets published. And he just wrote a piece, and it's titled "Build a Wall, but Leave a Big Gate." And so we can build a wall against the mass immigration coming out of Mexico, but leave a gate so we can keep letting people come in. And that's unsustainable. And yet here's a man with his journalistic power. He gets on TV. And again, I can state right now, I wish they would have me get on TV with him, and I would literally intellectually and mathematically slaughter him and embarrass him right there on national TV, because he doesn't understand the numbers. He doesn't understand the mathematics. He doesn't understand sustainability. And therefore, he is literally wasting everybody's time with his. And in fact, I just wrote a counter editorial to him, to the New York Times, to say, hey, this is ridiculous. This man really doesn't know what he's talking about.
Stephen has a question for you, and then I have also a question to follow up as well. So, Stephen,
Sure.
Go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Hi, Frosty. How are you?
Stephen, it's a pleasure, sir. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Oh, Merry Christmas to you as well. Hey, how about capitalism? How does that benefit from overpopulation? And if it does, is that why we're not dealing with the problem here in America?
Oh, there's no question. This country has manifested capitalism as the manifest destiny economic concept of the last century or two. And because capitalism always manifests on the fact that growth is the way it succeeds, then capitalism has been very successful. But at some point, capitalism outgrows the carrying capacity of any civilization and finally collapses it. Because capitalism is not responsible to the future. It's only responsible to the profits of the present. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it literally is suicidal. What we really need to move toward here in the United States and around the world is called steady state economics. And I've worked with Dr. Brian Check, who wrote a book called Shoveling Coal into a Runaway Train. And what he talks about is, first of all, we need to have economics, be responsible to the carrying capacity of the finite land and resources of any given landmass and civilization. And then, of course, the mandate for that is to have a steady state and stabilized population, so that you can literally have enough pollution to be solved. You have enough energy to drive the engines of the economy, that you have enough arable land to feed all of the citizens of that arena, that the animals have their ability to have habitation and food themselves, and that you keep a balance in the biosphere. And without that, the steady state economics, at some point, you continue with capitalism, the whole system collapses.
How would those policies be enforced? You know what I mean, in a peaceful way? How do you envision that?
I envision that, as again I said in previous, interviews, we need to have a national, international discussion on population stabilization across the United States first, to lead the rest of the world if we have to, then turn it into an international one, where not only the leaders of the world get together, but also all of the environmental leaders of the world get together, and then thirdly, all of the religious leaders get together. It's got to be that combination of all three, so that we choose to go forward into the 21st century with intelligence rather than emotions, with intelligence rather than population explosion, with intelligence to move toward the steady state economics and population stabilization that would allow us as a species to survive the 21st century and all of the other species to survive with us.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
You're most welcome.
One of the things I think is so important is repetition. And I know I've talked about this before, but we also have to talk about what people are going to eat. And if you have one cow per person, which we don't have right now, but if we had 7 billion people crammed into Texas and we had one cow per person, you would have 2 acres of land to support a cow. That's 14 billion acres?
Correct.
And that's 21 million square miles. If everyone is going to eat meat, and one cow per person is not a lot of beef when you really think about, people sometimes eat 1 or 2 pounds of beef a week. So people don't understand the space that it takes to feed people.
They certainly don't. And again, in this country, I did a story on meat consumption. It takes 2,500 gallons of water to put 1 pound of beef on a beef cow. It takes 16 pounds of grain to put a pound of beef on a beef cow. Of course, the amount of water to grow the grain is into the thousands of gallons. And then you talk about the petrol or the gasoline to move that grain to all of those feedlots. It is extraordinary. And then when you talk about the pavement that has to be laid, when you look at all of the other resources that have to be utilized, filling up the belly of a beef cow is truly a nightmare ecologically. And one of the things that's so distressing is that here in the United States alone, we kill off 24 million chickens every day to feed the 330 million people here in the United States. And I think the latest is we kill off something close to 150,000 to possibly 200,000 beef cows every single day of the year to feed 330 million people. I don't know what the numbers are on the turkeys, and I don't know exactly what the number of pigs that are killed off. But in all of that raising of all of those creatures, notice the waste is unbelievable. And I think the average cow defecates somewhere between 40 and 50 pounds of fecal matter every day.
Jeez.
And of course, look it up. It's pretty close to 50 pounds a day.
So Let me ask
Okay.
you. I don't know if you've done
Sure.
any research on this or not. I
Yeah.
really want to do more research because this is so interesting what you're saying. I've always heard like grass-fed cows, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe the 2-acre thing that I looked up was just for the grass-fed cows. But now what I've seen with the farmers around here, the ones that go with more cows, they violate the rule of 1 cow per 2 acres, and you can see all these cows. It literally destroys their field. And in the wintertime, the fields are just they're a pile of mud. They're just a mess. So what I would like to ask you is there also some bad things besides, how much space it takes to grow all this grain? Is it also even healthy for cows to be eating all this grain?
Well, it isn't actually, and most of the cows are now eating GMO corn. That's genetically modified, corn, and of course that would not be a cow's normal diet, but it fattens them up faster to get them to market with much more of weight on them, and of course the money from that gives the farmer even more finances, and so it's a circular situation. Let me really bring it home to everyone listening, and I would hope that this production and this broadcast goes across the entire United States, because hopefully it's an educational process. Garrett Hardin, the great biologist who has written many books, in fact died several years ago, he talks about the tragedy of the commons. And so to give you a simplification of it, you've got a 1-acre paddock, a 1-acre pasture that's obviously fenced in. You've got two cows or 2 horses, doesn't make any difference, and you've got 1 water tank. And so the 2 cows in that carrying capacity of 1 acre, well, they can drink all the water they want, they can eat all the grass they want, they can poop all over the place, and it gets washed off in the rain, and then the grass grows again. The urine dissipates and actually nourishes the soil. And so you have what is called a viable habitat. But let's put 100 cows into that single acre and still 1 water tank. And of course, that's exactly what the tragedy of the commons is. Now somebody wants to make more meat and have more cows and have more profit from that. Mm-hmm. But the commons now gets destroyed because so much defecation from the cows pollutes the soil to where it cannot recover, and urination turns the soil completely salted and completely untenable. And then everybody's fighting for the water tank because you can't get enough water. And then finally the water just runs out from the water tank. That's the tragedy of the commons. Well, that's what's happening here in the United States right now. If you go to all of Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan or even Ohio and Indiana and all of these really the pig farms in South and North Carolina, you're seeing groundwater is being poisoned by all these giant literally sewage receptacles that just are giant lakes that stay on top of the land. And what they really need for those farms are water treatment plants, but they don't do that. And again, because everybody's looking for profit over common sense, profit over the tragedy of the commons. And so everybody in the end is going to pay for it, because once you pollute all the groundwater across America, and you pollute all of the systems that make this environment work, you have breakdown on so many different levels. And then, of course, you're also seeing all the different kinds of foods that Americans are eating. Their guts are now no longer being balanced with the probiotics.
Right.
You're seeing Doritos and Coca-Cola and Snickers bars and all other junk food like McDonald's or like Burger King or like Pizza Hut. And people are not eating the basics that are literally are fresh and clean and organic. They're eating all the poisons and the poison food that has been grown with phosphate fertilizers from oil, which makes it very empty. In other words, your broccoli, I'll give you an example. The FDA said that just a couple of years ago in a test, that it took, I think it was 49 plates of spinach today. No, it was 79 plates of spinach today to equal 1 plate of spinach back in 1949, because the micronutrients have been completely sucked out of our soils here in the United States, and the artificial phosphates and fertilizers are allowing the broccoli to grow, or the other vegetables to grow, but they are lacking in micronutrients. So when people eat all these foods, they're not getting the micronutrients. That's why they're so hungry and they eat so much more. But also there's monosodium glutamate, these excitotoxins that make Americans forever hungry. Instead of having one Big Mac at 2,200 calories, they go back and eat a second Big Mac and then double fries and a double Coke. And so you see an obesity epidemic and very unhealthy American citizens. In fact, 7 out of 10 Americans are fat.
So, like, I'm arguing based on my research that there would be ideally 1 cow per 2 acres. But what's happening is the farmers will put 2 cows on 2 acres, 3 cows, 4 cows, 5 cows, 10 cows on 2 acres, because you're saying capitalism is only responsible to the profitability of the present, right?
That's exactly correct.
And could you elaborate on that idea? Because I think part of the problem is capitalism.
Oh, there's no question. To give you an example, we now know that the oceans are being destroyed with over 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic. Have you seen any capitalistic system that manufactures plastic that's done anything to further or even create a financially incentive program for recycling all of these plastics?
You know,
and of course, the answer is no.
Frosty, I think the problem is people, they just really don't understand the problems we're talking about.
Well, the capitalists and certainly the companies that create plastic bottles, they've all heard about the 100 million ton Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And as a matter of fact, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is now in all of the oceans of the world. As a matter of fact, in One Earth magazine by Julia Whitty, which I researched for this book also, there's 46,000 pieces of plastic bottles and all the different kinds of plastic floating on every square mile of the oceans of the world. Folks, that's a lot of plastic. And again, if you can wrap your head around 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic, floating and or beneath the ocean waves, you can see the unbelievable damage. But do you see any capitalistic companies like Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola or certainly all the drink companies or the water bottle companies with all these godforsaken bottles that everybody buys for $1 for a glass or bottle of water? Are they doing anything to create a recycling system? And the answer is absolutely not. They do nothing whatsoever.
There's a organization, I think it's called, is it 4ocean.com? I keep seeing on YouTube, they have these little films that come up. Have you heard of them yet?
As I'm a member of 4ocean.com, I did a piece on them recently, and they're 2 surfers who were in Bali, and they're surfing on these big waves. And I'm a surfer myself, and I'm a windsurfer myself. I've been surfing for 50 years, and certainly a windsurfer for the last 40 years, well, 35 years. And these 2 surfers went to Bali, and all they were doing was surfing through all of the plastic garbage that was curling in on the waves. And they were so sickened by it that they created www.4ocean, OCEAN.com, and I actually just bought 5 of the bracelets at $20 each, and sent them $100. They sent me the 4 bracelets. They're just a symbol, and the bracelets are to notate, if you will, that you have picked up 1 pound of plastics in the oceans. And what they've been doing on 27 countries now on the shorelines and under the water and in the oceans and the reefs is they have scuba divers go out, and I even volunteered to scuba dive myself because I've been a scuba diver for 55 years around the world, and I've seen the plastics destroy the oceans. And anyway, they actually pay the fishermen to go out and net all the plastics and pull them off the bottom and off the seashores and clean them up. And they're now in 27 countries. So any of you who are listening, please join these two surfers. And I've got their names, they escape me, but join them and send your money in to 4ocean.com and become a part of the solution. And then at some point, we get enough people who care enough. It's just like Chad Reiki, the guy who's cleaned up the Mississippi River for the last 15 years. He's literally picked up millions of pounds of trash out of the Mississippi River, and tractors and cars and sofas and chairs and drums and cable, you name it. He was Citizen of the Year in CNN a couple years ago, and I did a national piece on him. But yeah, 4ocean.com is well worth your while. But at some point, we've got to have an international 25-cent deposit return on all plastic and all containers, really, in order to recycle it and have incentives. So if smart people or dumb people toss it, there's plenty of poor people who will pick it up, and that would give jobs to them and a decent living at 25 cents. And if somebody wants to waste the 25 cents per piece of plastic or glass or tin or aluminum, then let all the poor people pick it up, and we would have a positive response to all of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and literally we could get that thing to vanish and clean it up, in fact.
So at 4ocean.com, they're saying 16 billion pounds of plastics enter the ocean per year. Now, this is the uninformed masses that are just throwing their plastic right in the ocean, right?
3.5 million pieces every 24 hours. That's 24/7, 3.5 million a day. Yep.
So we have the problem of the uninformed people. We have the capitalists who are making millions of dollars who don't care.
Right.
They are probably informed, but they don't care. Or they made the decision, I'm going to be a millionaire first, and then I'll stop doing this or whatever. I don't know.
Sure.
And so... well, could you speak about that a little bit? How do we... Here's the dilemma, because we have these giant corporations that are making billions of dollars.
Trillions.
Trillions of dollars doing things that are horrifically bad for the biosphere.
Yeah.
So we've got to have... I mean, you know, the problem with our government system is those big companies put the politicians in office, right?
That's correct.
So we got to change our form of economics, and we've got to change our form of government to solve this problem, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Absolutely. Wow. And again, as this biosphere destruction advances, I mean, I hope to be around for another 10 or 15 years. And if I can, and I will, I'm going to continue to speak up and speak out. I'm going to try to continue to get on 60 Minutes and NPR and PBS, because you're not going to hear this information from very many people on the planet. I can tell you this as a former math and science teacher when I was young and I started out my life, and then bicycling around the world to see all of this firsthand, and then donning scuba tanks. I've been diving in the Galapagos Islands, off of Hawaii, off of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And by the way, more than half of the reefs are dying right now because of the acidification of the oceans, because of the carbon footprint that's literally acidifying the oceans. It's been a tragic deformation of our planet biosphere just in the last 50 years since I was a kid. And voices like mine get drowned out by the big money. But everyone listening to this broadcast, everything I've said in every broadcast on the Mark Snyder Show, look it up. It's all verifiable. And for me, I've seen it firsthand. And that's why I'm so passionate, because we owe it to the future generations. It's called the 7 generations to come. Because when we walk on the ground, we're actually walking on the faces and the bodies and the spirits of all those who are going to become human beings on this planet in the future. And that's 7 generations ahead. Do we want to bequeath to them a 200 trillion pieces or 500 trillion pieces of plastic? Do we want to see all of the oceans completely destroyed by chemicals and or plastics and or glass and or junk and or drift nets? Do we want to see well over a third of all the species on this planet go extinct by 2050, which is just a heart blink, a heartbeat and a heart and a blink in time? Or do we want to give future generations that which we've enjoyed? And of course, at my age, I've been on the planet now 7 decades. I want to see everyone, and I don't care, black, white, brown, red, yellow, orange. I don't care what your color, your ethnic group. Every human being and every animal deserves the right to a decent life, a decent habitat, clean water, clean air, and food that's good for them and nourishes them, rather than what's going on here in the United States today.
Stephen, you got a question?
Yeah, I do. Just curious, Frosty, if you're familiar with the guy from the Netherlands working on ocean cleanup. I think his name's
Boyan Slate.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Boyan Slate. I did a piece on him also. I want you to know I care so much about the future and I care about what we're doing to the planet that I search out people like Boyan Slate. He's a Dutch kid, but he was going for an aeroscience degree, but then he went scuba diving in the Mediterranean, which I've also scuba dived in the Mediterranean. It's pretty dull diving there, but it's got squid and it's got octopus and it's got wrecks and so forth and so on. But he saw more plastic bags than he saw, and he thought they were jellyfish. And so then he started creating these giant sweeping machines run on a solar power, and they're testing one, I think, in San Francisco right now. And what he tries to do is get these into the currents of the North Sea, and he wants to get them out there into the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is 1,000 miles off of San Francisco, and it's between two of these gyres, these ocean currents, and it's the size of Texas, and it's anywhere from 30 to 60 feet deep, someplace in 90 feet deep of plastics, and that's Bic lighters, that's toothbrushes, that's plastic toys, that's all the plastic milk bottles, it's the plastic oil cans, it's everything plastic that gets tossed. And so he's trying to sweep it up and then pull it into the internal of almost looks like a giant stingray with arms. And what it does is it takes it in and then it munches it up, and then a collector ship comes and picks up all the plastic. One of the good things that's possible right now is they're actually experimenting in Europe, making all of the highways plastic highways instead of asphalt and pavement, which is all oil and a waste of oil, and of course all the gravel, and instead make all the highways into plastic. And I think they've already got the adhesives and the grinding machines to actually make plastic highways, and I would love to see that happen. I actually sent in Chad Craig Reiki's piece to the foundation, Gates Foundation, and also Boyan Slate, and asked to send both of those two people and their organizations $10 million. I mean, come on, Gates has got $59 billion. What's wrong with $10 million? Because I'd like to see Chad Craig Reiki literally have his organization. And for those of you who care about rivers, and I do, I canoe the Mississippi River and all the junk in it. And it's called livinglandsandwaters.com. livinglandsandwaters.com. And really, he's had 6,000 people who volunteered to pick up the Mississippi. And I think now he's going into the Ohio River. I think he's gone into the Ohio River. Wouldn't you all like to save all of the rivers, the Potomac and the Columbia and all of these great rivers in America by picking up all of the plastic, the garbage, the trash, the sofas, the plastic bags, the junk that's in them? Because there's just millions and millions of pieces of junk in the ocean or in the rivers of America, and you can't even begin to imagine how bad it is in the Yangtze or the Ganges. And I've been on both of those rivers. The Lima River out of Lima, Peru. Oh my God, plastic is flowing out into the oceans from that one too. Same thing coming out of Sao Paulo and certainly in Rio de Janeiro. As you can all imagine, I've ridden my bicycle through all these areas and got to see it firsthand, and my heart just sinks when I see the unbelievable devastation of our planet because of human beings who just simply are unaware or illiterate and or just don't care. And that's why we see all of these consequences worldwide.
So someone that is throwing plastic garbage into the environment, their awareness level is extremely low.
Well, they're illiterate, essentially.
Yeah. Now, talk about the dolphins and their ingestion of plastic.
Well, if you were on, you can always go to my Facebook page, and I always put all the stuff up on Frosty Wooldridge on my Facebook page. And that there was 2 sperm whales that just died, and they picked something like 50 pounds of plastic out of their bellies. And of course, any of you want to eat a bunch of plastic milk caps or a Bic lighter or some plastic wrap or any and all the kinds of plastic, and if you ate it, how long do you think your gullet would work?
Right.
You'd be beached very quickly, and you would have to have your stomach cut open. Well, these creatures out in the oceans, they're eating. In fact, it's called "This Heart Within Me Burns." I could send this 10-minute video to you, Mark, and you can publish it. But it's about a man who photographed all of the plastic that was ingested by all of the waved albatross on the Midway Island. And these poor birds are just literally dying because their gullets are filled with all the plastic bottle caps, Bic lighters. They even swallow toothbrushes, for God's sakes. I don't know how they do it, but they get a toothbrush down into they think it's a worm, and so they think it's a fish, so they swallow it, and of course they die. And it's sickening on every level. And yet, as I said, people just don't care, and illiteracy is a mainstay around the world. And when you put plastic in the hands of illiterate people, they toss it because they don't have any other awareness. And you can imagine here in the United States, with all of the intelligence of this country, and everybody has generally a high school education. You would think that American citizens would care, but only 33 to 35% of Americans recycle. And 65% of Americans could give a damn about recycling, and they don't.
I have heard that as many as 300,000 dolphins are dying every year now because of ingestion of plastic, entanglement, and marine debris and nets and things like that. That's an incredible number.
I think it's more than that.
Wow.
300,000 is a small number because the plastics are, again, you have to understand, there's plastics floating 46,000 pieces of plastic floating on every square mile of our oceans worldwide. Even when I was in Antarctica, when I worked in Antarctica for 6 months, there's plastic down there, and it's floating all over the place. And there's no question the whales, the humpbacks, the fins, the minke whales, the sperms, they're all eating these plastics. And of course, as you saw on my Facebook page just last week, those 2 big sperm whales both died because their stomachs were just filled with plastics. And so the dolphins, yes, and the dolphins who have to breathe, they're mammals. The dolphins have to breathe air, and if they get caught in these drift nets, and these drift nets are cut, and some of them are like 40 miles long in a big loop, and they just go rape the oceans. That's essentially what drift nets do, is simply a clear cut, if you will. You all know what clear cutting is. They just go in and completely strip. And I was just in Oregon this summer, and they just strip. In Washington State, they just strip the mountain. 1 minute the mountain's growing with a beautiful forest, and all of a sudden it's completely strip mined.
Jeez.
Well, that's what they're doing, and they destroy everything. They destroy the habitat and so forth. Well, same thing in the oceans. These 40, then they cut them loose when they get snagged, and then those drift nets are literally floating around, and then they catch the turtles that got to breathe. They catch the dolphins that got to breathe. They catch sharks that can't keep moving because they get tied up in those drift nets. And I think 300,000 is a very conservative number of dolphins that die every year. But then you start looking at all they're feeding on. I think the numbers are even greater, because I know dolphins are really paying a price in our oceans.
Wow. And I've heard that up to 90% of the ocean plastic starts on land and enters the ocean through the rivers. Is that true?
That's correct. That's correct. And up until 1978, cruise ships were tossing plastics and garbage. All the warships were tossing the plastic and the garbage and all the chemicals. The oceans have been the final toilet since 1950, when the chemicals started being tossed. Lucite was tossed after World War II. Mustard gas was tossed. If you want, you the listener, just go look at mustard gas dumping after World War II, and you'll see it shows all the spots. It shows all the spots that are where all the dumping was going on off San Francisco, in the Gulf of Mexico, off the East Coast. Even there was 500 drums of toxic radio waste that was dumped off of San Francisco, about 20 miles off San Francisco, in 55-gallon drums. And then a couple of years ago, NPR went out there, and they simply saw all the drums completely rusted open, and all the radioactive was just dissipating throughout the oceans, just like Fukushima. That was a harbinger of Fukushima.
So when we're talking about this behavior that we have where we're destroying our oceans, and you talked about the clear cutting of the forests, to me this doesn't seem rational. This almost seems like, as a people, we have a mental illness almost.
You know, I'm 72 years old, and I've seen America for 50 years as a writer and as a observational historian, if you will. And the American people, they care, but they don't know.
Right.
And they don't take action. And the leaders don't know. And if they do know, they don't take action. And I have found that the Congress is not the brightest and the best and the brightest.
Right.
Because if you see a problem like anchor babies, that should have been solved 30 years ago. If you got illegal immigration going on, that should have been solved in a heartbeat by making it illegal and enforcing the law to stop illegal immigration. And it should be enforced. And in fact, this was written way back in 1970. It's called the Federal Law, Section 8 USC, that's the United States Constitution, 1324. And this has been on the books for 30-something years. A person, including a group of persons, business, organization, or local government, commits a felony, federal felony, when he or she assists an illegal alien he or she should reasonably know is illegal in the U.S. or who lacks employment authorization by transporting, sheltering, or assisting him or her to obtain employment, or encourages that illegal alien to remain in the United States by referring him or her to an employer, or by acting as an employer or agent for an employer in any way, or knowingly assists the illegal alien due to personal convictions, unquote. In other words, it's $2,000 fine for every illegal, and it's up to 5 years in prison. Well, guess what? None of the presidents and none of the legislatures of the states, and certainly of the federal government, have enforced that law now for 30 years. And in fact, we have more mayors and governors actually subverting American law in order to protect illegal aliens in this country. So does that show that the American people care about law and order? Does it show that our own leaders, like Governor Brown of California, or the former governor, the lady from Arizona, or even John McCain, the former senator, or here in Colorado, which is a sanctuary state with a sanctuary governor in Hickenlooper, or Michael Hancock, the mayor of Denver, do they care about the law? Nope, they subvert the law. And same as our own senators, Cory Gardner and U.S. Senator Michael Bennet, they subvert the law because they won't enforce the law. So as a man who's watched this all my life, there is no sense to it all, because in the end, why is illegal immigration allowed? Because somebody's making a lot of money. Same thing with 1971 when Nixon put the war on drugs into gear. Guess what? We spent several trillions of dollars on the war on drugs, and it has not stopped any of the flow, which is over about $120 billion a year coming out of Mexico. God only knows how much is coming out of Canada. And then we've got all these opioid that's killing 40, 50,000 people every year. But guess what? Somebody is making money in big places, paying off our senators and congressmen, and so you don't see the laws enforced, and that's why we see what's going on.
Now, I remember you had a particular chapter in one of your books you wanted to cover, and I know we've talked about a whole lot of things, which has been really interesting, but I didn't want you to forget your original plan. Are we back on track now, or?
We can certainly do that. One of the things I want everybody to appreciate, that when I was traveling, and I still travel around the world on my bicycle, I did almost 3,000 miles this summer. I did 4,500 miles last summer. I plan on doing close to 4,000 or 5,000 miles next summer. I get to see the world up close and personal at that speed of 12 miles an hour. And the real tragedy is that, again, I found that as rational as American society is, and that we have quite a system going here, as soon as you jump into places like Africa or India or China or Indochina or Mexico or South America, you have what is called a third world mindset. A third world mindset is, I mean, it's like going into a Muslim world. You go into Saudi Arabia. Women are 1/4 the value of a man. They are the property of men. They can be honor killed at any time. There's assault and battery with female genital mutilation, which is legalized. So what I'm saying is, gays are killed, completely killed off. They'll chop their heads off, or they'll shoot them, or they'll toss them off a building. So when you go to these third world countries, you have a third world mindset. And it's even worse. And when I've gone into Asia, it's nuts. There's no rational thinking whatsoever. There's no rational action. And that's why those countries are even poorer and have, it's called the Human Misery Index. And so I'm looking at my chapter 2 right here. And in Peru, people live by the skin of their necks daily. 1 year, I bicycled the entire length of South America to see the poverty extremes that most people in the U.S. and Europe cannot conceive. It's worse in India and Bangladesh times 100. Actually, it's times 1,000. Yet those countries accelerate their human populations without end. And I'm sitting here looking at a picture, and you all can just just look at pictures of pollution in India. India is just a quagmire of plastic crap and steel and bottles and cans and junk from one end of India to the other. And it's 1,000 times worse than the United States. And I can tell you, the United States is no pretty picture. There's enough junkyard. There's millions of junkyards in the United States. But in the United States, we either try to pick it up a little bit, or at least we house it a little better. But in India, the rivers run in plastic and bottles and cans and metal and junk and chemicals and crap because it's third world mentality. And third world mentality essentially is a mentality that's out of the dark ages, where everybody used to throw their trash, but now the trash is not biodegradable and it simply builds up everywhere. And if you go to places like South Korea, you'll see thousands, literally millions of people living in the slums, trashing the waterways, and filth and human waste beyond comprehension. And I show this in pictures in my part 2 of this book. And so again, we're dealing with the human race, and not all of the human race has got enough intellectual energy and educational energy to actually do something about all of the plastic waste and all the plastic problems that we're all facing.
Now, you talked about plastic roads, which is very interesting to me. And that would part of the advantage of that be you wouldn't be necessarily recycling. You would take that plastic and then make it the road. Isn't there even issues with recycling? Aren't you just kind of supporting the problem? And I mean, recycling is good. I'm not trying to say it's bad, but maybe we should stop creating plastic cups and tote bags and all this other stuff. You know what I'm saying?
I would agree with that. Probably the best way to stop the plastic pollution is either make it all out of corn or any other biodegradable plant, so that it will last for just a short amount of time, but then biodegrade very quickly, and or completely ban. Personally, I think we should completely ban worldwide all plastic containers and bags, certainly plastic bottles and one-use containers, certainly all the plastic that's in the grocery stores and all of the containers, because it's used once. I mean, think about it. I mean, a water bottle, all the water bottles, they're used once and then the plastic is there. We don't need to do that to ourselves. We really need to go back to having everybody carrying a cotton bag or 10 cotton bags, which I don't eat that much food, but I always have my cotton bags. I've got one cotton bag from Meyer Thrifty Acres. No, two. I have two cotton bags from Meyer Thrifty Acres in Michigan from 38 years ago. And both those bags still are working for me, and got a little bit of holes in them. But yes, we need to get away from all of this plastic.
Frosty, thanks for coming on the show, Frosty. Great show. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Stephen.
You bet. Take care.
Bye-bye.